With Strawberry Fields Forever and Penny Lane in the can, the Beatles were confident that their reply to the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds was well underway. Capitol, though, needed a new single, and the tracks were accordingly requested for a double A-side in February 1967. Since UK chart protocol in the 60s was that anything issued as a single could not be included on an LP, the group submitted to this with ill grace. Apart from putting them back to square one with a new album, the decision killed the informal concept of an LP drawing inspiration from their Liverpool childhoods. Fortunately, they were at the peak of their powers, and only 2 days after finishing Penny Lane, they were back in Abbey Road, working on their finest single achievement, A Day in the Life.
But I think the big influence was Pet Sounds. Beach Boys, that was the album flipped me. Still does, actually. Still one of my favourite albums of all time. Just because the musical invention on that is like, wow. But that was the big thing for me. I just thought, oh, dear me, this is the album of all time. What the hell are we going to do?
If anything predetermined A Day in the Life, it was LSD. A song about perception, a subject central both to late period Beatles and the counterculture at large. A Day in the Life concerned reality, only to the extent that this has been revealed by LSD to be largely in the eye of the beholder. This skepticism about appearances was present in songs like Rain, And Your Bird Can Sing, and Tomorrow Never Knows. Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane are further links in a chain of songs about perception and reality, of which A Day in the Life is an explicit culmination. In the first verse, based on a report in the Daily Mail in January 1967, John refers to the death of Tara Brown, a young millionaire friend of the Beatles. On December 1966, Brown, an enthusiast of the London counterculture and like all its members, a user of mind-expanding drugs, drove his car at high speed through red lights in South Kensington, smashing into a parked minivan and killing himself. Whether or not he was tripping at the time is unknown, though John clearly thought so. Reading the report of the coroner's verdict, he recorded it in the opening verses of A Day in the Life, taking the detached view of the onlookers whose only interest was in the dead man's celebrity. On the next page in the same newspaper, he found an item whose absurdity perfectly complemented the Tara Brown story. There are 4,000 holes in the road in Blackburn, Lancashire, according to a council survey. This, intensified by a surreal reference to the Victorian concert venue, the Albert Hall, also in South Kensington, became the last verse.
So it had two stories. One was the Guinness child had killed himself in a car. That was the main headline story. On the next page was about 4,000 holes in Blackburn, Lancashire.
For instance, Day in the Life, John and I sat down and he had this opening verse. I think he'd got the idea, or we then took the idea from like the Daily Mirror or something. So the Blackburn, Lancashire, the holes, Albert Hall, all just got mixed, just a little poetic jumble that sounded nice.
How the group themselves pictured the song is unclear, though John seems to have had something cosmic in mind, requesting from George Martin a sound like the end of the world, and later describing it as a bit of a 2001. All that is certain is that the final chord was not, as many have since claimed, meant as an ironic gesture of banality or defeat. It was originally conceived and recorded Beach Boys style as a hummed vocal chord. In early 1967, deflation was the last thing on the Beatles' minds, or anyone else's, with the exception of Frank Zappa and Lou Reed. Though clouded with sorrow and sarcasm, A Day in the Life is as much an expression of mystic psychedelic optimism as the rest of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. The Beatles began recording A Day in the Life 2 days after John was inspired to write its verses. In the intervening period, Paul added the double-time middle section, which in its new context became a vignette of a vacantly busy life of routine. At this stage, the composition was so new that they didn't have time to work out how to join John's section to Paul's section, and so had to record the basic track, leaving 2 arbitrary gaps of 24 bars. Paul, who had listened to music by John Cage and Luciano Berio, decided that the 24-bar bridges would be filled by a symphony orchestra, going from its lowest to its highest note in an unsynchronized slide, a real freakout or oral happening.
It was mainly a John song. And he had the, I read the news today, oh boy. And he'd taken a lot of it from a newspaper. And then I had another bit. Woke up, fell out of bed, dragged a comb across my head. That was a little bit I had. It wasn't doing anything. And so we thought, well, that'd be good. We could put that in the middle. And we got the concept of sort of building it a little bit like a sort of mini operetta.
He had that one little lick floating around in his head. Couldn't use it for anything. He stuck it on. Now, instead of going on and developing that lick into the middle eight, which we would normally do, we got into how about putting a whole different song, which he already had, that had nothing to do with Day in the Life, which is all about being on the top of the bus in a barber chair and putting those two beats, which is a precursor to Abbey Road style later on.
So John said, well, let's shove it in the middle and see if we can't connect them up in some way. We connected them with a series of empty bars on either side of Paul's section before we came back into John's as a reprise. And we knew we had to fill those bars with something sensational. And we didn't know what it was going to be yet. And in order to keep the 24 bars so everybody knew when to come back in again, dear old Mal Evans stood by the piano counting the bars.
More nonsense has been written about this recording than anything else the Beatles produced. It has been described as a sober return to the real world after the drunken fantasy of Pepperland, as a conceptual statement about the structure of the pop album, or the artifice of the studio, or the falsity of recorded performance, as an evocation of a bad trip, as a pop wasteland, even as a morbid celebration of death. Most of this misinterpretation stems from the fact that a lot of people don't know that A Day in the Life was the first track begun for Pepper. At this stage, the Beatles had little idea what the new LP was going to be about, if anything. Conceived on his own terms, A Day in the Life fell into place at the end of the finished work 4 months later with a naturalness that could hardly have been apparent at the time it was recorded. Still less likely is that the Beatles would have set about constructing an album to be subverted or commented upon by a piece of music unlike anything they'd ever done before. The final chord, played by John, Paul, Ringo, Mal, and George Martin on 3 pianos and tracked 4 times, was recorded separately 12 days later. Made in a total of around 34 hours, A Day in the Life represents the peak of the Beatles' achievement. With one of their most controlled and convincing lyrics, its musical expression is breathtaking, its structure at once utterly original and completely natural. A brilliant production by Martin's team, working under restrictions which would floor most of today's studios, completes a piece which remains among the most penetrating and innovative artistic reflections of its era.
The moment I remember best, outside of, say, him bringing the song, it was obviously a gorgeous song when he brought it. And I was a big fan of John's. You've got to remember that, you know. It wouldn't just be, oh, yes, professional person will write this. It'd be like, oh, yeah, I can't wait to get my hands on this. And I'd learn the chords off him and we'd develop it. But the moment I remember was when we got to a little bit that he didn't have, where we sort of said, I'd love to turn you on. And we looked at each other and think we know what we're doing here, don't we? We're actually saying for the first time ever, words like turn you on, you know, and which was in the culture anyway, but no one had actually said it on record yet. And there was a little sort of look of recognition between us, like, do it, get it down.
When you're thinking back on that period, would you say that was the apex of that feeling of expansion and creativity that was going on at the time? What album would you say caught that at its height during that period?
Pepper, probably.
Yeah.
I think probably Pepper.
Oh yeah, it was important to me because I thought it was a damn good piece of work, that's all. Yeah.
What I really wanted to do from then on was to treat our rock work rather like a classical symphony. I wanted to integrate things. I wanted to get the boys thinking in symphonic terms. I wanted them to write songs that blended into each other, that actually had recurring themes, that even had canonic devices one with the other, and which had snippets coming back, and treating it like a formal full-scale work where you had maybe a 30-minute length that was actually a cohesive whole. Paul dug this idea very much. John didn't. John was into just the sort of simple basic rock song, which he was probably right for himself.